In this episode, we're building the last piece of furniture for the tiny apartment. This multifunctional media console is meant to store a bunch of stuff, from the obvious TV and audio equipment to game consoles, guitar and bass amplifiers, and even a record player. It has a clean look with push-to-open doors and drawers and internal cable management. But it's not all. In the back, there is more storage room and a dedicated parking lot for the vacuum. Let's get started. Boom! This project had been in my mind for over a year, and I finally found the time to focus and dive deep into my thoughts to bring it to life. The tiny apartment build is getting closer to an end, and this media console will be the central piece in the space. It's an out-of-the-ordinary console because it has storage on both sides and was custom built to fit specific objects. Its construction was a bit complex and too long for a single YouTube video, so I broke it into two parts. The second video will be published in a few days, so keep that in mind. To help you visualize the progress of this build, I included snippets of the 3D model for each part. We're starting at the bottom and making our way to the top of the cabinet. I started by cutting the base panel to size while removing all factory edges from this black MDF. I also cut the middle platform at this point since the dimensions were very similar to the base. My design might look a bit weird now, but when you see the final construction, you'll understand why I made this cutout. The base and middle platforms will have matching grooves to receive the sliding doors, so I'm working on those simultaneously. The base has stopped grooves, whereas the middle panel doesn't because it will be inset and you won't see the edges. I wanted to create a space to park my robot vacuum at floor level, so a cutout had to be made on the base panel. You will see a bunch of Rockler Tools throughout this project, some smaller like these bench cookies and other more innovative and professional. Rockler has been a supporter of my work for years, and I love how convenient their woodworking tools are and how extensive their catalog is. I will leave links in the description box to the tools used in this project. Yes, this cut is rough for now, but it's okay because it will be flush trimmed by the end of the build. I went ahead working on the left side panel that will be facing the room. This face of the console will have a display cubby, so I need to make another big cutout, this time as precise and as perfectly straight as possible. Next, I'll cut the bottom dividers to their final size and start the assembly. To make sure all my crosscuts are at perfect 90 degrees, I use my Rockler crosscut sled. Something that I appreciate about their table saw accessories is that they always come with a stop block included, so it's super easy to set the correct length and make all those repetitive cuts. While at the table saw, I cut some more parts out of black MDF for the next steps. And here is silly me with Shrek ears, realizing just how complex this build will be. One requirement that I imposed was to make this cabinet fully collapsible, so no joint is going to be glued. This media console will come with me the day I leave the tiny apartment, so I want it to be the easiest to pack and carry around. I found this furniture connector kit that works with my floating tenon machine. It allows me to assemble and disassemble all the cabinet parts without compromising strength. This was the first time I used this system, and it all worked nicely, so it isn't really that complicated. Once the mortises are made with an 8mm bit, I use the drilling guide to create the holes that will receive half of the locking mechanism. This is the screw we need to turn in or out to lock or unlock the connectors. On the matching mortises, I hammered the split anchors flush or slightly below the surface and threaded the pins. The cove in the pin needs to be positioned to receive the bolts that will lock everything in place. I could make the rest of the joinery and attach the bottom dividers to the middle platform. I won't be attaching anything with these connectors to the base. Instead, I will drive wood screws from the bottom up since those will never be seen with their heads against the floor. This seems strong enough. For some longer joints, I will add regular tenons for alignment, and I prefer them to be slightly loose to ease up the assembly. Here you can see the cam action of the connectors pulling the pieces together really tight. Next, I'll prepare the joinery for all the custom cubby sections. It's a bit hard to explain, but there's an area inside this cabinet that will receive the record player that needs to be deeper than the rest of the cubbies. So I need to make a small cutout on this piece to be flush with the components next to it. Hopefully this will make sense further down the road. While cutting the mortises, I try to be as awake as possible to prevent any mistakes, but at some point I got the wrong measurement and drilled a recess in the wrong place. So here's me fixing the issue with a tiny piece of black MDF. Thankfully this won't be seen because it will be covered by one of the smaller drawers. Something worth pointing out is that this type of joinery can only be assembled on one axis at a time. This means that you must carefully consider where you'll be drilling your mortises and in which direction. If you do it without much thinking, you risk not being able to assemble your project. For example, this backing panel couldn't have a connector going into the middle partition because it would be impossible to insert a pin in that direction and at the same time connect the pieces that I'm currently screwing together. You will get a better sense of it during the final installation in the tiny apartment. Okay, cool. So now let's work on the sliding doors. For these long doors, I used yellow MDF and cut 2 oversized pieces on the table saw. Then I put my Rockler router lift to good use and routed rabbets on both the top and bottom edges of the yellow boards. I used a digital multi-gauge to set the router bit to correct height and depth. As you can see, the top lip needs to be deeper than the bottom lip. The top rails are also 3 times deeper than the bottom ones. It is still oversized, which is a good thing, so we can now finesse the perfect height for the doors. They must get into the grooves without being too short. I can cut them to their final length, being the back door longer than the front door, to close the visual gap between them when looking at a steep angle. I wanted to integrate my 2 small amplifiers into this media console, so I built sliding trays for them. I chose Bloom hardware. These are Movento Tip-on Bloom Motion drawer slides, and these are Onyx black cabinet hinges. For this purpose, I use the springless model since I will use their push-to-open system. You know that I'm a sucker for handleless furniture, and this media console is no exception. Before we begin the drawer slide installation, I need to make 2 blocks that will live inside each amplifier cubby on the side where the door hinges. Since the hinges are inset, it is necessary to create this lag so that the sliding tray doesn't bump against the door. The blocks were attached with black screws to each side of the main cabinet. Now I can proceed with the drawer slides installation. They feature a soft close mechanism, and you can use them as they are or install some extra accessories like I'm doing here that will turn them into a combination of push to open and soft close drawers. To keep both slides synchronized, it's best to install a rod that is cut to size to fit your drawer so that when you activate one slide, the other one is also triggered. These trays are fairly simple to make. You just need a bottom panel in terms of functionality and a shallow front and sides to hide the sliding mechanism. Next, I'll be working on the door fronts. I chose Baltic birch plywood for most of the fronts. I tend to cut the pieces slightly bigger to make a final pass to remove any burning marks. To drill the holes for the hinges, I use the drilling system from Rockler. You can use these templates on their own or attach them to the blue rail for accurate repetition. The drill guide has a depth stop, so I could keep the hole straight and perpendicular to the plywood surface and stop with the correct depth for the hinge cups. Then it's a matter of swapping the panels with the same height and drilling the holes. As I mentioned, these hinges don't have springs because they are meant to be used with the tip-on mechanisms that allow you to open the doors by pressing them. Some people use this hinge model with springs or even with the soft close feature along with the tip-ons, but I don't think it makes much sense. I've wanted to make an educational video explaining how these hinges work and which model to use in which situation, but I'm not sure it would be interesting to you, so let me know in the comments. I typically use this template, but it doesn't fit my current situation. So I decided to take the same concept and create templates with custom measurements specific to this project's requirements. I cut the acrylic on my small laser cutter and attached a small strip of wood to serve as a fence. The hinges snap into plates, and I love how convenient they are to work with. They also make these caps to hide the screws after doing all the adjusting. Sorry to interrupt, but I have to tell you that I lost the footage showing the process of making these two small drawers and this big drawer. I will try to recap and make a dovetail joint with scraps to illustrate how the original ones were made. So this is a dovetail jig I utilized to make the half-blind dovetails. The first thing I did was to choose the inner and outer faces of my drawer pieces. Then I drew an arrow on the inside faces going up. I labeled each corner with numbers, in this case 1, and inserted each workpiece on the jig with the arrow visible and pointing into the jig's center. For this corner, I will use the right side of the dovetail jig and bump my pieces against the fences on the right and clamp them securely. Since plywood tends to get massive tear-outs when using router bits perpendicular to the wood grain, I use the thin scrap to prevent the outer fibers from blowing. I installed the included router bit into my router and set it to the depth indicated in the jig. Then it's a matter of driving the router along the waves of the template. And this is how I got my dovetail joints. As I said before, I also lost the construction of this big drawer, but this process is covered in my wardrobe video, so no big worries there. Here I was attaching the bottom panel and drilling specific holes to attach the drawer slide components. Uh-oh. This will be an inset drawer, so I need to attach the drawer slides further into the cabinet so that the 90mm front can be flush with the black edges. The size of this drawer was specially defined to fit the dining table extension pieces when they are not in use. Here I happily tested the extensions while checking that my idea worked out in the end. The record player tray. The construction of this sliding tray was the same as the amplifier ones. I need to upgrade my router table and add a dust collection that works for dados and grooves. I might do that for my next project video. The edges of these drawer slides will be visible in the final assembly, so I decided to paint them matte black. This way I won't have silver lines calling for attention on each side of the black tray. Finally, I got to cut the top to its final size. I decided to leave a few centimeters on the back edge past the face of the cabinets. Since I don't have a toe kick, this will help our brains to understand that our feet need to stop before hitting the cabinet base. The bottom drawer is at floor level, so I could imagine my toes popping it out unnecessarily. Then it was a matter of placing the top over the console. Tune in for part 2 in a couple of days where you'll see the finished project. A big shout out to Rockler Woodworking and Hardware for making this video possible and to all my Patreon members. Thanks everyone for watching and go get your hands dirty. Até já!